Welcome everyone to lecture 14. So now we are in module 3 of this course on ecological economics, and in this module and particularly in this lecture we will explore human behavior, institutions and justice. So we begin with a simple question, or I would say simple but an important question. So that how do people make decision? How do people like you and I? How do we make decisions? If you look at traditional economics, it assumes that people are rational, being rational consumer is a very, very important assumption of traditional economics. And that being rational consumers, we make choices that maximize our own benefit. So that's why we are known to be rational, that every decision that we make keeping in mind that it maximizes our benefit. Many environmental policies, such as carbon taxes, polluting prices, all are based actually on this particular assumption, which we will deal with it today in this lecture, that to what extent is this actually correct to assume in a real life situation, because in real life it is often different. Our decisions are not shaped by just that we are rational, but by our habits, emotions, fairness, social influences, and the way choices are presented to us. What are the various options that are presented to us? In what way these choices and options are presented to us? So we often know what we should do, but yet in many circumstances we behave differently, right? And I'm sure that connects with each one of us. So for example, have you ever planned to exercise more, eat healthier, or even save money? But did you really follow that? That's a very simple thing. That's the gap between intention that I'm going to, exercise more, I'm going to from today eat very healthy food. I'm also going to save a lot of money so that I can do things in a much more better way, or buy certain things which I am trying to buy. That's the intention. But many a times we fail in doing what we actually wanted to do. So that's the gap between intention and action, and that is exactly what this lecture is about, that why there is a gap between intention and action. Okay, let's move to the slides now and try to understand that what is this rational actor assumption, and what are the problems associated with this. Like I mentioned, this is something very much seen in a standard economic model, particularly in mainstream economics. As I mentioned, people are often viewed as rational economic agents. Sometimes we call this as homo economicus. And this model assumes that individuals make logical decisions to maximize their own benefit. And it is this, assumption, or this, the model is actually based on four key assumptions. So what is the first assumption? The first is complete information. This means people know all the available choices and understand their consequences. For example, if you are going to a shop to buy a refrigerator, the model assumes, this economic module of rational agents assumes that you know the price, you know what would be the electricity consumption, you know the maintenance cost, you know the lifespan of every available model before you make your decision. Meaning you have all the information about the product that you are planning to buy, which is not just the prices, but it is also about the lifespan of every refrigerator that is available today in the market. And then you make a decision that I go and buy this particular refrigerator. So that is the kind of complete information that is assumed when you talk about the model of rational economic agents. Second, stable preferences. Now, what does this mean? This means that your preferences remain the same over time and are not influenced by how choices are presented. So, for example, if you prefer reusable bags over plastic bags today because they are environmentally friendly, the model assumes that you will make the same choice tomorrow under similar conditions. So, you would never prefer a plastic bag over reusable bag. It will always remain the same in similar conditions. So if you go to a shop, you always buy things from that shop and you always use a reusable bag. Even if that day you forgot to carry a reusable bag, you would rather leave the things but you will not put those things in a plastic bag. So that's the assumption of stable preference. Your preference never change. Third is about self-interest. Now, this assumes that people make decisions to maximize their own benefit. For instance, if two products are identical but one is cheaper, a rational person would always choose the cheaper one because it saves money. So that's about self-interest. And the fourth is consistent choices. This means decisions always follow a logical pattern. For example, if you prefer cycling over driving and then driving over, taking the bus, then you should also prefer cycling over taking the bus. So it's like a logical pattern that you follow. Cycling over driving, yeah, driving over taking bus, so which means that you will always prefer cycling over taking the bus. So your choices remains consistent and do not contradict each other. Now, let me give you an example of carbon tax. So when a tax is placed on fossil fuel, so carbon tax is a tax that you put it on fossil fuel to reduce the consumption of fossil fuel or petrol or coal, whatever are those, carbon intensive products, their price increase, right? The moment you put a tax, the price of that particular resource increase or that particular product increases. So economists expect that people will respond by driving less, using public transportation, buying electric vehicles. Now there are a lot of subsidies, etc., coming up to buy electric vehicles, for example, or switching to cleaner sources of energy. Maybe you would decide that I'm going to install solar panel, right? Similarly, pollution charges assumes that firms, so if the pollution charges are usually given to the firms who are polluting firms, and the assumption is that, for example, cess, so if you are a polluting industry, every unit of dirty water, for example, you bring out from your production process, you have to pay a tax. So that why is that tax being put up? The idea is that because that would lead to firm reducing pollution, because polluting now becomes expensive, right? So in all these cases, the policy assumes that people and firms carefully compare costs and benefits and make rational decisions. However, over time, researchers found that real people often do not, in real circumstances, people often do not behave this way. And let's just go into a little bit of a history here. In 1955, Herbert Simon introduced the concept which is known as bounded rationality. He argued that people, do not have unlimited time, perfect information, unlimited mental ability as well to analyze every possible option. Instead of searching for the absolute best choice, they often settle for an option that is good enough. That this is good enough. Imagine suppose if you are buying mobile phone. Instead of comparing every model available in the market, reading hundreds of reviews, do you really have the time? And also calculating which phone gives the maximum value. Most people stop searching once they find something that meets their needs and fits their budget. That's the most important thing. Maybe you would have got something better and cheaper, but this was your budget and you decided that, okay, this seems to be the best. So Simon calls this as behavior satisficing, choosing a satisfactory option rather than the optimal one. And I think this is something which all of us do. A few decades later, in 1979, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky developed something called prospect theory, which showed that people make decisions differently when they face uncertainty, particularly. So first one was bounded rationality, that you buy something where you see that you are satisfied rather than going for optimal one. The second theory is about prospect theory, which showed that people make decisions when there are uncertainty, many choices changes. They discovered that our choices are influenced by emotions, perceptions, and the way options are presented rather than logic alone. Like I gave you the example of cycle over bus, that's the logic, but that may not be the case because we are also driven by various other factors and influenced by various other factors such as emotions, perceptions, etc. So, for example, many people are more upset about losing 1,000 rupees than they are happy about gaining 1,000, even though the amount is same. The tendency here is known as loss aversion, means that people often avoid risks when they expect gains, but are willing to take risk when they have to avoid losses. right? So this is an interesting thing. So prospect theory basically claims that actual human behavior frequently differs from the prediction of traditional economic theory, because the tendency always is to averse losses rather than, gain, expecting gain. So you will go out of your way to ensure that I don't lose anything, rather than, but you would avoid risk. If somebody tells you that, okay, you gamble, you are going to get X amount of money, that's taking a risk to get some money, you would not probably do it. But somebody tells you that, if you don't take this risk, you are going to lose so much amount of money, then you would see that it is worth taking the risk, otherwise I'm going to lose. So these ideas transform economics by showing that people are not perfectly rational decision makers. Instead, our choices are really shaped by limited information, mental shortcuts, emotions, social influences, etc. Many a times one may think of buying an expensive car or an expensive clothing, etc., because of social influences as well. Understanding, and one classic example here is the marriages. The way Indians spend so much on marriages, even if a family cannot afford, it would take loan and still pay so much money to celebrate the marriage. Now, what does it show? Does it show that an individual is being rational? So that is something that is very, very important, because understanding these behavior pattern is essential for designing also environmental policies that work in the real world rather than only in theory. Okay. Now, just to give you an example, a policy that was designed assuming rational actors and did not work as expected. If some of the examples are, for example, low uptake of energy efficiency subsidies, continued purchase of tobacco despite health warnings, low retirement saving despite tax incentives, all of these are practical examples that when we make these policies, keeping in mind that consumers or people are rational agent and they are going to make the right choices, then many a time we see that these assumptions actually fails in the real world situation. Okay, then there is another interesting thing which we call it as a cognitive biases that shape environmental decisions. So, like I mentioned, that people do not always make decisions carefully, calculating costs and benefit. Instead, we often rely on mental shortcuts to make decisions quickly. These shortcuts helps us in everyday life, but they can lead to, predictable mistakes known as cognitive biases. So let's look at these six biases that are especially important for ecological economics as well. Present bias. So people tend to give much more importance today than to the future. For example, many people, know that installing solar panels or buying energy efficient appliance will save money over the long run. However, because the initial cost is high, the benefits come later, they postpone the decision. Similarly, government may delay investing in climate adaptation or even climate mitigation because the benefits may only be seen many years later. So that's something, the first bias, which we call it as the present, that the amount of importance we place in today rather than tomorrow. The second one we discussed a bit is loss aversion. People dislike losing something more than enjoy gaining something of the same value. So if a carbon tax increases petrol prices, people often focus on extra money they have to pay. So they may oppose the policy even if it leads to cleaner air, better health, lower emission, etc., because they will lose out more money today if they have to pay more for every liter of petrol. So in other words, the immediate loss feels stronger than the future benefit of using cleaner or an expensive petrol, which will reduce consumption. Third is status quo bias. People generally prefer to continue with what they are already doing, even if a better option exists. Someone may continue using a petrol car instead of switching to an electric vehicle, or continue using plastic bags instead of reusable bags, simply because it is familiar to them and requires less effort to change. So change often feels uncomfortable, even when it is beneficial. And I think you will have a lot of examples around you. When you go to a supermarket, many people do not even care, even if they are paying 2 rupees extra to buy a bag which is not a reusable bag, which is a plastic bag. Then comes the availability heuristic. So, people judge how serious a problem is based on how easily they can remember an example. So, I here give you the example of 2022 Assam floods, because I come from Assam, and it was the most prominent thing that we saw, that many people became much more concerned about flood risk because the event was so fresh in their mind. Now, if you ask them, there was a big flood in 1957, people will not even think of it, or people will say, oh, well, that kind of thing would not happen again. So everything that has just happened, which is very much fresh in your mind, people get more, people are more concerned about it. On the other hand, slow problems like, groundwater depletion, soil degradation, they receive much less attention because they happen gradually, or even they are less visible. So you'll always see that, particularly in states which are flood-prone states, which also has groundwater issues, flood always takes the center stage compared to coming up with proper laws and regulations for groundwater depletion. So that is also another important thing to remember. Now, there is one more optimism bias, because people often believe that bad things are more likely to happen to others than to themselves. Right? For example, someone may agree that climate change is a serious problem, but they still think, well, flooding would not affect my home, or heat waves is not a problem of my city. This can also reduce people's willingness to prepare for future risks, despite they know that there is a risk associated, but this is called optimism bias, that it's not going to happen to me. I am not going to see the bad impact of climate change. Probably my entire generation will not. Social norms. Our behavior is strongly influenced by what people around us are doing. If everyone in your neighborhood separates their wastes for recycling, you are more likely to do the same. If most people leave lights and fans on unnecessarily, others also follow the same behavior. So research has shown that simply telling household, most families in your neighborhood use less electricity than you, can actually encourage people to reduce their own electricity use. And this also shows that people are influenced not only by prices and rules, but also by the behavior of those around them, the social norm. So what we are trying to say is that these 6 biases actually helps us to understand why people do not respond to environmental policies in the way the economists expect them to. Because it's not just about rules and prices and command and control. It is more about a lot of other biases which comes into play when one see that pricing or see that policy. So many a times, and as I mentioned, that it is a wrong way to assume that, or wrong thing to assume that everybody here is rational and will completely go with the policies are asking you to do. And therefore, these 6 biases, if you keep in mind, will help you to have policies which would be much more influential than just following on prices and rules. Okay, now let's look at something called social preferences beyond self-interest. This is also something we need to remember, that so far we have seen that people are not always perfectly rational, but then there is also another important finding from particularly a school of thought, which is the behavioral economics, that people do not always act in their own self-interest. Many of our decisions, like I mentioned, are also influenced by fairness, kindness, trust, and cooperation. Right? These are called social preferences. These are not social norms. These are social preferences that you want justice, you want cooperation, you want fairness. Those things also at many a times decides what is the impact of that policy is going to be. So altruism means helping others without expecting anything in return. For example, people donate money to environmental organizations. Many people ask, why are you donating money? That's something, remember, that people do out of kindness or fairness, right? Volunteers for river or beach cleanup, you will see a lot of volunteering campaigns, volunteers coming and doing it, planting trees in their communities. They may not receive any personal benefit by planting a few trees, but they do it because they care about the environment and future generations. So this shows that people are sometimes willing to contribute to the common good as well. This is called altruism. Then there is something called fairness and equity. People care not only about how much they receive, but also about whether the outcome is fair. And in today's world, with the whole concept of justice, fairness, equity, this has become a very important point. There's a famous experiment called ultimatum game demonstrate this. Imagine two people have to divide 1,000 rupees. One person decides how to split the money, and the other person can either accept or reject the offer. If the offer is rejected, neither person gets anything. Suppose whatever is the offer, if one says, oh no, I don't accept it, I reject it, then nobody gets anything. So according to traditional economics, the second person should accept any amount because something is better than nothing. But in reality, many people reject offers they consider unfair. For example, 50 rupees out of 1,000, even though they lose money themselves. So it doesn't mean that if the other guy is giving me 50 rupees and keeping the rest 950 rupees, it's unfair. So why would I take that 50 rupees? I would say, no, I do not. But if you look at it from an economics lens, and one would say, well, it's better to get something than getting nothing. So this tells us that fairness also matters. Same idea also applies for environmental policies. For example, if a carbon tax is seen as placing a heavier burden on low-income households than the wealthier households, people may oppose it, even if it reduces pollution. So it's, again, not just so black and white that people are not paying for the carbon tax. For example, in developing economies like ours, we have not yet in full-fledged, implemented carbon tax. And one of the most important reasons is fairness. Who are those who would be most hard hit if such kind of tax is imposed? Then comes reciprocity and cooperation. Many people are willing to cooperate if they see others cooperating too. Particularly in the case, if you take a case of a village, people may argue not to cut too many trees from a community forest. As long as everybody follows the rule, they're happy to cooperate. But if a few start cutting more trees than allowed, others may also stop following the rules. And this is called conditional cooperation. People cooperate when they believe others will do the same. This idea is central to Elinor Ostrom's work, who showed that many communities successfully manage forests, fisheries, irrigation systems by building trust, monitoring each other, and following shared rules, something which we will discuss a bit more in detail in the next slide. Right, so this is called conditional cooperation. Reciprocity is something they see and they will reciprocate, and another is, okay, if you do not do, I'm also not going to do. Intrinsic motivation, people often protect the environment because they believe it is the right thing to do, not because they are paid. Many people recycle household waste, carry reusable bags, save electricity because they care about the environment. Interestingly, these people are suddenly paid a small amount to recycle. Some may become less motivated, in fact. The activity changes from doing something because they care to do it or care doing it for money. So there is this is also known as crowding out, where external rewards actually reduces motivation. And this reminds us that environmental policy should not only depend on financial incentives. Values, trusts, social responsibilities are also powerful drivers of behavior. So such kind of social responsibilities needs to be created among people. It's not just about you benefit them financially. Some may respond, but some may not respond who do not really need that kind of financial benefit. So the key message is that people are influenced not only by personal gain, but also by fairness, cooperation, concern for others. So do keep that in mind. Understanding these social preferences also helps us design environmental policies that people are more willing to support and follow. So we will now see how these ideas actually gets reflected in Elinor Ostrom's work on governing common resources. Okay, so we discussed about prospect theory. Now let's look at this prospect theory and the environmental framing together, right? So it was developed by Daniel, as I mentioned, by Daniel and Amos in 1979 to explain how people make decisions when they face risk and uncertainty. So like we discussed that in traditional economics, they assume that people make rational decisions by carefully comparing costs and benefit. Prospect theory shows that in reality, our decisions are often influenced by how we perceive gain and losses rather than by the actual outcome. And so for the prospect theory, there are three main ideas to remember. First is the reference dependence. People do not judge outcomes in absolute terms. Instead, they compare them with a referral point. That's why we call reference dependence. Usually what they expect or what they currently have, it depends on to a particular point in time. So for example, a farmer expects to harvest, say, 100 bags of rice this year. And if the harvest is 90 bags, the farmer may feel disappointed because it is less than expected. Now imagine another farmer expected only 70 bags because of a drought, but could harvest say 90 bags. The same harvest of 90 bags now feel like a success. So the amount is same, but people's feeling are different because their expectations are different. So for someone, a particular amount of tax maybe is something that they feel is good because maybe they thought that it will be much more expensive for them, and so they are willing to go ahead with that taxation. But for some, that taxes is much beyond that they were thinking of paying to save the environment, and they may say that no, we would not pay for it. So this is why what is people's expectation, and since we don't live in a very homogeneous society, that heterogeneity needs to be understood. Everyone will have different expectations from the kind of policies that we come up with. Then there is something called diminishing sensitivity. People notice small changes, but much more than they notice the same change when the numbers are already very, very large. Remember, here we are talking about prospect theory. Here we are talking about losses, how people perceive gains and losses, right? So, for example, in case of diminishing sensitivity, receiving an extra 100 rupees when you have no money, feels very valuable. But receiving an extra 100 rupees when you already have, say, 10,000, it does not really make any difference. So again, the same idea applies to environmental issues. People may react strongly to the first few days of a heat wave, but if extreme heat continues for weeks, they may gradually become less sensitive to each additional day, even though the risk is increasing. And this actually, we can connect it with the recent heat waves that happened in Europe. There was so much noise in the entire global media, even in Indian media. And I was thinking it's only 37 to 40 degree, whereas in India, this happens up to 45 to 50 degree. But we do not really see so much noise globally about the heat waves. Why? Because this is what it is, diminishing sensitivity, right? People are so used to it. They have been, experiencing this to up to 50 degree. So if it goes up to 37 degree, it's actually absolutely nothing to discuss about. So then if you look at loss aversion, this is the third idea, which we had also discussed earlier, that people feel pain of losing something much more strongly than the pleasure of gaining same thing. For example, losing 1,000 usually feels much worse than actually finding 1,000. You will feel a bit happy, but you will not keep thinking about it for 1 month. But if you lose 1,000 rupees, you will keep on searching, where did I lose it? This has important implications again for environmental communications. Suppose government wants to save electricity. Question is, which message is likely to be more effective? If we say, if you save electricity, you can help protect the environment. But on the other hand, rather than saying this, if we say that if you waste electricity, you risk losing clean air, losing a lot of money as well, because electricity is going to cost you, and also you will lose out a stable climate. So if you kind of twist it a bit, the research shows that the second message, where you show what people will lose, people respond in a much stronger way compared to just telling them that you will protect the environment. But then there is an important caution. If the message is too negative, for example, saying that climate change is so severe that nothing can be done, then people will feel hopeless, right? Then they will say, well, it is already done, so it's no point taking any action. So the key lesson for prospect theory is that how we present information matters. And same environmental policy or message can produce very different responses depending on whether people see it as a gain or as a loss. Remember that losses always have a stronger emotional impact than equivalent gains. Okay, now from the prospect theory, let's talk about another very interesting point, which we call it as nudges and behavioral policy. So far, we have learned that people do not make perfect decisions because they are not rational. This means that government cannot always rely only on taxes, subsidies, and regulations to change human behavior. But sometimes small changes in the way choices are presented can make a big difference. And these small changes in the way the choices are presented to consumers are actually known as nudges. And the idea of nudge theory was developed by Richard Thaler and Cass Swinton. So the nudge does not force people to do something, it does not take away their choices. Instead, it makes the better or more sustainable choices easier or more attractive. So it basically makes you make a little change and it becomes much more attractive. So we call it as a nudge. So first is, let's just take a few examples. And the first, let's look at as a default option, which is the choice that is selected automatically unless a person changes it. So what does it mean? Imagine a new electricity connection automatically includes a green energy plan. But customers can switch to another plan if they wish. Many people simply stay with the default option. Meaning, changing all of it would take so much time that there is already a default that if you take this new connection, automatically it will include a green plan into your, overall electricity planning. But you can always switch to another plan if you wish to. But this shows that people usually stick to easiest choices rather than making it very, very complicated. You ask yourself, there could be various complicated ways of reaching out certain things, and you may say, or maybe a rule which you are not very, very happy with, but then you feel that, okay, to go against this rule or against the whole thing that is up in front of me is going to take away a lot of my time and energy. I rather stay here. That's what we say as a default. So this is the nudge. So what did you do? You basically know that if you give people an option in the very beginning, this is your normal electricity plan, please add this green plan as well, then many may not choose. But if you by default you add it, and then you tell them that, okay, we have added it, it's there already, but yes, you do have a choice to move, then many people may not like to choose. So that's one way of making a small change, a nudge. Then comes social norms. People are influenced by what others around them are doing. For example, a household might receive a message that most families in your neighborhood use less electricity than you and is saving, or many families in your neighborhood is using solar energy and is able to save so much of the money or electricity. The simple comparison often encourages people to reduce their own electricity or go for a renewable source of energy. And this actually has worked, in my own neighborhood, where many neighbors have started to install solar panel, and then this information started to spread that the moment they have installed solar panel, their electricity bills have come down. And many in those neighborhood people started to visit their neighbors and ask, is it true? And then they said, yes, it is true. And they have also started to install. Now, the point here is they are not installing because they feel that it is going to save the climate or in the future. They are installing because they are, saving money, or they are not losing out, and they are not losing out particularly when their neighbors are gaining, right? So again, this is again a small nudge, that you inform people that what is the amount of saving that one would have if it goes for a cleaner source of energy or uses less electricity. I don't know if you have observed, in many places they also put the footprint kind of a picture. When you open the tap, you can see that every minute of water that you are using, how much water gets wasted, plus how much money it would cost. Immediately you will have this tendency, if you put that in front of you, it will have a tendency to close the tap. Then comes commitment devices. People are more likely to achieve a goal if they make a commitment in advance. So example is that a family may promise to reduce their monthly electricity bill by 10%, or decide to carry reusable shopping bags every time they go to market. Such commitment also helps people follow through, on their intentions, because you made a commitment. Okay, this new year I make a commitment, I'm not going to use any plastic bags. So you try to stick to those commitments. Simplification is very important. People are more likely to make decisions when information is simple and easy to understand. For example, clear recycling labels on waste bins, or star ratings on energy efficient appliances. And that's why you do see, I think many of us make that decision, whether it's a 5-star or 2-star or 3-star, although it is saving your money, your pocket would be saved, but it is also an environmentally friendly option. When choices are simple, more people make the right decisions. Salience, meaning people pay more attention to information that is visible and immediate. A smart electricity meter that shows how much electricity you are using in real time makes people more aware of their consumption. As a result, many households may reduce unnecessary electricity usage. So seeing information immediately can often change behavior. Then there's something called loss framing. As we learn from prospect theory, people respond more strongly to losses than gain. So instead of saying you can save 5,000 rupees each year by insulating your home, you can say you are losing 5,000 every year because your house is not insulated. So this information is same, but the second message usually takes a stronger, has a stronger impact. Now, the question you may ask is, do nudge solve everything? Well, nudge encourage people to make better choices, but they are not complete solution. Now, if you really look at a lot of climate, studies, nudge theory has taken a very important role, has started to play an important role, because it does feel that it encourages, if you make a slight nudge rather than making the entire policy change completely, which people will notice more. If you make a small nudge, it can actually help people, encourage people. For example, it can encourage people to use public transport if buses are not overcrowded, if buses are not unreliable. Similarly, asking people to save will not solve water shortage if there is a poor infrastructure, right? So this means that nudges should support, not replace, broader environmental policies such as regulation, public investments, and better infrastructure. You might give an incentive to go for public transportation, but they are not safe. At night, they are not safe for women to travel. Then that nudge will not work. So you do need to also invest on public infrastructure, better infrastructure and regulations. In India, we can see examples of nudges in many environmental programs, like, clear energy labels on electrical appliances, help consumer to choose electricity, energy efficient products, smart electricity and water meters make resources, they're more visible. You do see this is coming in India now. Many states have it. Public campaigns such as Swachh Bharat Abhiyan also use social norms by encouraging people to adopt cleaner behavior. These are nudge, actually, because of others in the community are also doing the same. So you also feel, okay, let me also make Bharat Swachh. The key message is that small changes in the way choices are presented can actually encourage better environmental behavior, but lasting sustainability also requires strong policies and institutions. So it's not that we depend entirely only on nudges, but it do play a very significant role. Okay, now what is the implication of all of these for ecological economics, the course that we are studying, right? So we have already seen that many of these decisions are influenced not because consumers are rational, but because by emotions, habits, fairness, social norms. So what does this mean to ecological economics? Now, it changes actually the way we think environmental policies and sustainability. First is that thinking about the future. We discussed that people usually think about today, what is happening today. They are not so much interested to know what is going to happen in the future. So in economics, we often compare benefits we receive today with benefits we receive in the future. And this is done using something called discount rate. Now, something that we will discuss in more detail. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on what is discount rate here. You will understand it in later stage. However, we have learned that people show present bias. They give much more importance to today's benefits than to future benefits. So, for example, a community may be hesitant to invest in flood protection today because the benefits may only be seen years later. Yet delaying investment could lead to much greater loss in the future. So this is very important to understand, right? So question is, when we all are aware that a lot of extreme events that is happening because of climate change, why every country is not going ahead and investing a lot in reducing climate change? That is because what we also know, that if you start investing on mitigating climate change, reducing climate change, you will also have to reduce a lot of money that is available for other activities. So you bring that money for mitigation project. Now, the problem is that the government would like to actually show the benefit to people of their interventions today. So building bridges, building housing infrastructure, building roads are something that one can show community people today. But you install something whose benefit will not happen for the next 20 years or even for 10 years. Suppose you go for a big afforestation project and tell community and people, well, this is going to give you cleaner air, if not now, but 20 years down the line. Well, I don't know how far that government will come back to power, right? So this is also a problem. This is why government often needs to also think differently from individuals. Public policy should give greater importance, therefore, to well-being of future generations, especially when dealing with long-term issues such as climate change. But many a times government are not willing to do that. For them, the short-term benefit seems to be much more lucrative to come back to power than investing something which is long-term. Now, this also is important for community, for people like us to understand that we should not always also have a very short-term perspective of what the government is doing. We need to also understand what is the long-term implication of all these interventions that is happening. So this is where thinking about the future becomes very important. Valuing nature is something that ecological economics often asks people how much they are willing to pay to protect a forest, clean a river, or conserve wildlife. But behavioral economics tells us that these answers are always very, very objective. For example, people usually ask for much more money to give up a park near their home than they would be willing to pay to create a new park somewhere else. You ask people that, okay, we are creating a new park, can you please donate this, because people value what they already have much more than something that might come in the future. And this means that we need to be careful when using surveys to estimate the value of environmental resources. So when you ask, people may give you a huge number, but when you really ask them to pay, they might not. Managing shared resources is something that behavioral economics also shows, that people are often willing to cooperate when they trust each other, believe that everyone else is following. And this idea is also actually supported by Elinor Ostrom, which again, something we will study Ostrom's idea in more detail in the next topic. Designing better environmental policies is something that behavioral economics reminds us, that good policies must also be acceptable to people. For example, as we are talking about, that carbon tax may be economically efficient, but if people believe that it is unfair and do not understand why it is being introduced, then they may actually oppose it. So this is important, that policymakers do think not only about economics, but also about how you are communicating, understand the whole idea of fairness, trust, and public participation. So the main lesson from this lecture is that understanding human behavior helps us design better environmental policies. Ecological economics recognizes that people are influenced not only by prices, but also by emotions, fairness, social norms, concerns for future generation. So if we are able to take these behavioral factors into account, we can actually develop policies that are both efficient and more socially acceptable. Okay, now to let us summarize all of these that we discussed today. So first is that people do not always make perfect rational decisions, because as you have already now heard me saying, that so many things influences people's decision, and also it includes the way information is presented to them. This means that environmental policies cannot just assume that everyone will always respond logically to prices and incentives. Second, the behavioral biases that we discuss, present bias, lost aversion, social norms, all of these influence how people around us are going to respond to any particular policy. Third, nudges actually is a very powerful tool which can encourage people to make better environmental choices, but and that can be very simple changes, as I had given some examples of clear information, or also telling them what they are losing, etc. However, nudges alone are not enough. They should support stronger policies such as regulation and public investment. Fourth, people are more likely to support environmental policies when they believe that those policies are fair to themselves and also to others. Even a well-designed policy may fail if people think it places an unfair burden on certain groups. Finally, ecological economics recognizes that human behavior is more complex than traditional economics assumes. To design effective environmental policies, we must consider not only prices and financial incentives, but also values, fairness, trust, social norms, and concerns for future generations. This idea provides more realistic understanding of how people behave and help us design policies that are much more effective and socially acceptable. And you do see some of your, some of the readings, and I would encourage you to read these, documents, these publications. These are going to help you actually to understand what we discussed today in the class. But one thing that we can discuss, or you need to actually think about, is does behavioral economics strengthen or undermine the case of urban carbon pricing? You can think about it that we bring in emotions, fairness, social norms, so many other factors, not just people being rational. In that context, how do you see carbon pricing? Does it makes carbon pricing actually something very difficult to implement, or something that actually would strengthen if these factors are taken into consideration? So I'm going to stop here for today's class, and we will meet again for the next lecture. Thank you for your attention.